Hello, this is Professor Joseph Holbrook. I am your professor for ISS1120, the mini term for spring 2015, and this is chapter 4 of our textbook by Hunt and Colander on the Introduction to Social Science. In this chapter, we're going to talk about society and cultural change. So, the importance of culture. All human experience is intertwined with the social environment. Culture is the total pattern of human behavior and its products, such as thought, speech, action, artifacts, shared language, norms, and values. We cannot live without culture. Some of the elements of a culture that we will look at in this chapter would include cultural evolution, which is a gradual cumulative process, and it's also reflective of all individuals. Culture creates human beings and human societies, and it evolves through time. Culture is created by the aggregate choices, values of all the individuals that compose it, but all the individuals are also shaped by the culture. So it's a reciprocal process. Socialization is a process that shapes individuals to become members of society. Multiculturalism is a society in which there are more than one culture coexisting. All individuals in a culture are not exactly alike. The United States, for example, is multicultural. Even more so here in Miami. We have a number of cultures that coexist in our city. So the United States is a blend of overlapping cultures. Subculture similarities hold us together. U.S. culture is a composite of these various subcultures, and the challenge is to find the correct mix. The nature of a society. A group of individuals living as members of a community are society. One of the characteristics of society is that it's shaped over several generations. A society is a group. Society must be bound by shared relationships and be organized. Not all groups are societies. There's a number of different theories about social change. How does society change? We know it does. How does it change? What are the mechanisms that cause the change? One view is the concept of the ideal golden age. This was held by the Greek philosophers. They believed that the earliest group of human beings were comparable to gold. It was a golden age of humanity, an ideal paradise, like an Eden. And that after this golden age, society began to deteriorate from gold to silver, silver to bronze, and from bronze to iron. Then there's the opposite, which is the doctrine of inevitable progress. This is the view that the world will just continue to get better and better. It's popular in modern United States and also in Europe. It's basically the view of modern classical liberalism, that human beings are inherently good, that with education and rationality, the world can be made progressively better and will continue to improve with modern science and modern discoveries. That view was shaken deeply in World War I and World War II and the Great Depression. The horrors of the 20th century called into question the idea that humans are inherently good and that the world will progressively get better and better. Then there's a view of cyclical change. This is the idea that there are normal cycles of growth, climax, and decline. And there are several civilizations that have held the view that there are different ages or cycles, and that the earth will be destroyed and then start all over again in a new age. The ancient Mayas believed this, for example. Then there's another idea that I used in my dissertation, which includes the idea of generations or generational change. This is a kind of a modern view. The idea of youth or teens didn't really exist before the 20th century. People went from being small children to adults without much of a transition. But with the modern information society, technology, modern educational needs, the period of youth has been stretched out through high school into college and now into graduate school, and you often have youth living at home into their 30s. And in this view of generational change, the idea is that each generation has to, as they become adults, they have to make conscious choices about which traditions to keep and which ideas, beliefs, or traditions to jettison. One example of generational change currently would be views on gay marriage. One generation ago, it was very controversial. Two generations ago, it was unheard of. But this is a major social change that has happened with a change in generations. Factors that cause cultural change would include technological development. For example, in the theory of generational change, one German social scientist theorized that when you have a society undergoing rapid technological change, it increases sharply the tension between generations. And when you go through periods of slow technological change, there's almost no tension between generations. In 1000 AD, in the High Middle Ages, there would have been very little tension between father and son over technological change because there was almost none. And therefore you had much slower pace of change in society. But today you have grandparents, parents, and children coexisting with very different relationships to technology, and this causes for sharp generational change, sharp generational tension leading to cultural change. Cultural diffusion is another idea. This is an idea of a gradual diffusion of cultural views, ideas, and ideologies. An example right now would be ISIS is become very prominent because of its ideas and its ideologies as well as its actions. Collective actions. We could think recently of the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street as two different examples of collective action. Geography and climate can change the culture, and generational change, as we said earlier. Factors that stabilize a culture include social norms. Humans are very conservative about change. If it's not broken, don't fix it, would be one expression that reflects that view. If things are working, then we need to leave it alone. However, there's a strong sense today, especially with our political system, that it's not working. And so there's a view of a need for change. Habits are another thing that keep stabilize culture and keep it from changing too rapidly. Value attachment. People are very attached to certain sets of values and religious beliefs. Mores have strong values. There's also vested interest. A vested interest is when someone has an investment in things functioning the way they are. It's a status that relies on the status quo, and so they resist change. Some examples might be people who are heavily involved in the oil industry don't necessarily want alternative energy sources to become available. Social problems. There's a wide recognition of adverse effects of many social problems such as poverty, racism, inequality. There's a belief that the conditions can and should change. Large modern societies experience more complex social problems. than do simple or pre-literate societies. Seldom is there a simple or complete solution. With complex social problems comes complexity in finding solutions. But the solutions often also bring unintended consequences. Some possible unintended consequences could be mandatory. Some examples of this would be mandatory drug sentencing, which seemed like a good idea in the 1970s, but it's been unequally enforced and in many cases has stripped men out of poor neighborhoods for nonviolent drug offenses such as smoking marijuana on a street corner, getting arrested and sent to prison mandatorily, even though they're not trafficking in drugs. And so you have entire communities of women and children with no men. In one neighborhood in L.A. was discussed on NPR radio, this problem. Raising the minimum wage, it may be a good thing, but it also can cause a loss of jobs. The welfare program Aid to Dependent Mothers is a wonderful thing to help young women keep their babies and raise them, but it might also discourage marriage, because as soon as the young mother becomes married, she loses her benefit. The war on drugs is certainly important, but it has entirely destabilized Mexico, as it did earlier Colombia. And so social solutions can sometimes lead to new problems through the law of unintended consequences. The cultural lag theory is that since culture is a pattern of interrelated elements, change in one area will create strain in another. Adjustments cause lag in which tension persists. Technological change sets the pace of change in modern industrial societies. Some of the limitations of cultural lag theory include material culture changes do not always precede non-material changes. It can be difficult to reach agreement on the changes that are needed, and making adjustments is very complex and often impossible. Social problems can exist within or also between societies. Cultural relativism is the idea that all cultures of the world are equally valid. And this cultural relativism requires that we examine cultures in their context, must be judged relative to the culture's value system. Ethnocentrism is judging other cultures by one's own value system. A particular example, a problematic example of this would be the idea of female circumcision in some parts of Africa, which is to the Western mind is a horrible, brutal practice that violates what we understand about gender equality and about human rights. So the question might be, do we apply cultural relativism to this example and try to judge such practices by their own value system, or is there some more universal standard of values that we can use to bring to bear on this kind of practice? So here are some cultural regions of the world. You see that Western European American is where we live. Many of these cultural regions could be defined by religion as well as geography. For example, Europe was divided between Protestantism and Catholicism, although now large parts of Europe are very secular. But the Catholics, for the most part, were the colonizers of Latin America, and therefore Latin America is overwhelmingly Catholic, whereas North America, at least above Mexico, is overwhelmingly Protestant. In the Slavic areas, you have Eastern Orthodoxy, which is a variety of forms of Greek Orthodox religion, which divided from Roman Catholicism back in the 10th century. In the Asian cultural areas, you would have strong influence of Confucianism and to some extent Taoism. The Indic, of course, there'd be a strong influence from Hinduism. And I